Hello and welcome to this conversation about leadership, innovation, and all things business challenge related. I'm Jamie. I'm the Executive Chairman and Interim Chief Executive of Digital Transformation Specialist C-Learning. I have the privilege of spending my time working with change makers and leaders at the forefront of what they're doing around technology, culture, and establishing them at the forefront of what they're doing. And that will lead me on in a few moments to my special guest today, who I'm absolutely thrilled is joining us for this conversation. But before we move on to that, I just want to ask my co-presenter, if I can call you that, Chris. And he's here also, so if my internet drops out, it'll carry on with Chris. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
The reliance on technology as always. Hey, great to see everybody. I'm the Product Solutions Manager. I work alongside Jamie for C-Learning. And yeah, I'm interested in anything that makes people's lives and jobs easier. It's all about getting that work and life balance right, and it's great to share the conversation with Steve today and get some insights from him. So delighted to be on the call.
Thanks a million, Chris. And by way of introduction to our special guest today, Steve, I've known Steve a long time. We were just chatting before we started the recording about how long that is. It's longer than I care to think about. Actually, time flies when you're having fun, as they say. But ever since my first introduction to Steve was in his role as he is joins us today, Chief Executive of Vissensa, an absolutely outstanding IT support partner, if I can describe it that way. I'll let Steve do a bit more of a proper introduction in a minute, but Steve is someone who is an inspirational chief executive, in my opinion, somebody who works with clients as almost like as part of the team, because that's how we first got to know each other. I was facing some big technical problems in a leadership role I'd got, and some very powerful friends at IBM said, I think we know who can help you with this, and pointed me towards Steve and his team. And he absolutely transformed the project we were working on way back in the day. So I'm delighted to be joined by Steve today. Steve, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Absolutely awesome to see you.
Yeah, listen, it's great. It's great to be invited. Thank you for doing that, and great to see you both. So again, yeah. Also, thanks for the introduction. I'm not sure that I deserve it, but yeah, for 16 years, and we met very early on in Vissensa's history. So I'd imagine we're 14 or 15 years knowing each other, if nothing less. Jamie, we were probably about a year or so into the business at that point in time. And yeah, you're right. It was IBM, and that's because Vissensa is a managed service provider with all the manner of things that you'd expect managed service providers to do. But also we have ensured that innovation, forward thinking is one of the strap lines we have in our title, and innovation is really, really important. So we have ensured that we have continued to keep pace with innovation. So managed service providers have turned themselves into cybersecurity specialists. They are now transforming, they're flipping and pivoting again into AI specialists, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I've done quite a bit of stuff already from an AI perspective with the business. So there's some things that I think I'd love to share with you about where that market is at this point in time. I think we were different, and I think that one of the things different in terms of our trajectory is different because we also had a fairly strong data center presence by the time you and I met. And so therefore we also run 9 data centers across the world. Okay. I don't own them, by the way, but I wouldn't want to. But effectively, we have services in 9 data centers and service a real wide range of sectors, from finance to energy to pharmaceutical to defense. All of those type of industries, logistics particularly as well, and all of those allow us to gain an insight how businesses are using their IT. It's surprising how IT is regarded as almost it's regarded as a tap today, isn't it? People who use IT, they think it's just going to be there, switch it on like a light switch, or turn a tap on like a tap. for all of us that are in IT, recognise that it's nothing like that at all.
No.
Everybody's using things differently, and some people are reinventing wheels on a daily basis where actually they really didn't need to do that.
Yeah.
And some people are falling down holes where holes have already been identified, and the manhole sign has been put up, and they're still falling down those holes. And I'm not quite sure why that is in our industry, more than any other industry, but that still happens, and it's something that is all about things like this.
Yeah.
You know, people coming on podcasts and understanding some of the stuff that other people are getting up to
100%.
may well short circuit them having to do something that they're just guessing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what you've just talked about there segues nicely into my first sort of more directed question, really. But before I come to that, you just made me smile when you were talking about sort of what it's like to work in IT. I used to have a picture above my office when I was last more close to what you might call an IT director as a role. And it was just a little cartoon of some boss bursting into an IT center saying, "Nothing's working. What are we even paying you for?" And then underneath it, there was another cartoon of the exact same thing with him bursting in going, "Everything's working. What do we even pay you for?"
Yeah.
And anybody who's worked in IT will be able to relate to that in the sense of like, you just can't win sometimes. You know what I mean?
And just amplify that by 1,000 if you work in managed services.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's running, you never hear anything, and if it isn't running,
yeah, exactly.
Luckily enough, we do more of the former than the latter. Let me
anybody who's never
our
actually
uptime is pretty damn good.
100%. Anyone who's never actually led a technology company, I think, might sort of incorrectly think that technology just magically keeps working in the background. But anyway, it really segues nicely into what I sort of want to dig into in a bit more detail there, because you mentioned sort of, a bit of the journey of Vissensa there, and I think Vissensa is quite different to most technology partners, and that's hence we're having this conversation, because we're only talking to people that we think are doing really interesting things for interesting reasons. And I think you bring an authenticity to everything you do and a partnership approach, which is quite distinctively different to a lot of other technology support partners. Yeah. And I guess that might be. Yeah, well, it's hard won, I mean, it's not an accidental thing, is it? And maybe we'll dig into a bit more of that during this conversation. Yeah. But my first open question before I hand over to Chris, and we'll do a sort of Chris ask a question, then I'll ask the next one. But if I ask the first one, you mentioned the journey there with Vissensa, and you've obviously been at the helm and the chief executive of Vissensa through some really transformational years in technology. I mean, if you think just how fast stuff's changed in the last couple of years, never mind 15, 16 years. During those transformational years, what would you say are the most significant shifts that you've witnessed in what you do? And how has that shaped the direction of your business? And how have you navigated that? Because it's been a crazy whirlwind, hasn't it, in the last 10 years?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a really interesting question you ask, because look, when we started in 2008, okay, as I said, we're an MSP, but we started from not the traditional end. Most MSPs are some technical people that have got together, know some people, they do some IT for them, then they realize they do it quite well, then they get some other customers and some referrals, and by the all of a sudden you've got 20 customers, that you've got lots of technical people, you're hiring some sales people, and you start to become a business in that respect. We start from the data center business. So my background is all those years ago, when I was 18 years old and I got into IT, because I've done nothing else in my life other than IT. I was a computer operator. I was a trainee computer operator, to be honest with you. Wow. And then worked my way up to be an IBM KICS DB2 systems programmer. Got into that sort of stuff, and then worked for predominantly US organizations on technical role. Got into sales. Was classically trained in the US. Was fortunate enough to work in the US, both on the east and the west coast, quite a lot. Came back to the UK and did a ton of work in the UK and in Europe, particularly again for UK and US organizations, particularly generating new markets from a distribution perspective for either products going into new markets or opening up new markets. And then my last role with a paycheck at the end of it was actually doing a similar role again for US and UK companies in Southeast Asia. So most of the Asian market, which was fabulous fun, but I got fed up on a paraffin budgie and thought, I want to come home and just do something here, and hence doing the stuff with Vissensa. But it was very predicated in terms of data center and infrastructure and stuff like that. And so therefore, it was a natural thing to do, was to create an environment where Vissensa was a data center. And we won some fantastic business. There's some of that business is still in our data centers today, which I'm really proud of. 2009, 2010 customers that are still with us, love what we do, growing, and have been fantastically supported by my team. And that was co-location. So that was a case of, we need to be in London or we need to be somewhere. We either want you to provision the kit or we want to be on your cloud platform. This is way before things like Azure turned up, okay, or was traditionally out there, way before Google really got into their sort of workspace sort of stuff. And we would either provision kit and provision comms into racks and do all that sort of stuff. And then provide the services on top, up to the top of the infrastructure layer. So, not interested in your SaaS programs, not interested in your logistics stuff that you might have, or SAP or whatever it might be. We'll just provide you with a platform and all the connectivity. And man, that was fantastic business. And we were doing other stuff in the traditional MSP space alongside that. And then all of a sudden, this thing called Cloud 1.0 came along, which I found quite funny, because we were already doing Cloud 1.0 in our own platform. Okay, just wasn't quite as big as the cloud platforms that had just turned up. And when you look at that evolution to specifically answer that question, then the market pivoted at that point in time, because they thought what they had on their hands was a silver bullet. So if you think about all of those 1.0, or generally what those 1.0 customers did, is they went to the cloud for two things. They wanted it simple. I could just turn it on and off. Okay. And I want it to be efficient. Yeah. Okay. And they got that, but actually what they didn't realize was, like most things like the egress charges were the things that were actually, when you actually put these two bills together, okay, I haven't got a data center anymore, and I don't have kit that I have to buy anymore. But actually, the cost of running this stuff is not a million miles away from where it was if I had my own platform. And actually, it's actually more difficult to do that now, because I can't touch that platform, and that platform also, I don't have control over that platform. So actually, they can take it up and down. They can fettle it. It might go offline. I can't ring up my managed service provider and say, "What am I doing?" And I think that was something that was a massive shift, a massive seed shift, as we all started to go there. We all started to go to much more SaaS-based stuff. But I think the misnomer is that people thought that was a silver bullet.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't. So if we wind that forward to Cloud 2.0, you now have CTOs, FDs, CIOs in boards that are basically the board saying, I thought this was going to be easier, and I thought it was going to be simpler, and I thought it was going to be at least as reliable. And actually the answer to that question is, well, it's about the same. And so, you now have this situation where people have started to come back from the cloud. The cloud's never going to go away, and there are fantastic workflows that need to be in the cloud. But I think people have now realized that actually there's stuff that doesn't need to be in the cloud. Do
you think
it doesn't need to be in the cloud? Then
just dig into that point a bit more detail, Steve. Do you think that part of that might be because the vendors of those big cloud solutions might have overpromised kind of what they might be able to deliver? Do you think there's a bit of marketing spin around it, or do you think something else?
Well, I think the thing is that it becomes, we talked about this thing about turning the tap on and the lights on, and then if you go to any of these cloud solutions, you pick what you want, you pick the processor, you pick this, hot, cold, warm, storage, you do all that sort of stuff. You pick where your recovery site wants to be, and all of those sort of things, and you push the button, and guess what? It's procured. How much thought and detail, and unless you've got people in your environment who understands exactly how your business gets supported by this environment, then actually there's always a danger that when it fails, for whatever reason, it's IT, it's hardware in the cloud. It's not in the cloud, is it? We all know it's sitting in terra firma in data centers. And then when that happens, do you have the right expertise that can do this stuff? Yeah. I mean, just a very practical example of that. When I'm hiring for, let's say, a senior network engineer, right, we'll ask them a whole bunch of prerequisite questions. And today we're getting more people that go, yeah, I can do that. I can do that on a virtual switch in Azure, but I've never touched a real switch. Yeah, I've never VLAN'd a real switch. I don't know. I couldn't do that. Yeah. Well, the real switches are really the switches in the cloud. They are cloud switches. And funny enough, if I just move on in terms of how's that morphed, the other thing I think that has maybe turned the pressure back the other way a little bit, in some cases has made it easier for the cloud companies, but also I think has also given people an understanding of maybe I need a hybrid environment, is edge computing. So one of the other things I think, and that's come out of the fact that pulling lots of data back across networks is slow and expensive, particularly if I'm then going to egress that data again, because remember the cloud companies, if I'm egressing it across region, so I'm doing it from North America to Europe, or UK to Europe, in terms of the geo, then they consider that an egress, unless you've got an express route or you've got a dedicated link that you're paying a lot of money for. So you don't get that metered charge in the same way. And I think so people have, again, they start to adapt, they start to pivot, and they go, okay, can I put my computing somewhere closer? Can I do a bit of that computing somewhere and now just send some stuff back to base? And I think that also allows people to have this ability to, the other thing of course is that people want something to be really close to where the consumption is. And that doesn't work if you're in a data center 100%. Somewhere, and then it won't work at some point for you. Whether you're an organization that expanding, you'll always have an inverted commas issue.
Maybe so maybe just to interject there, but just on that point, maybe we'll expand on that a bit later in the conversation, because some of the trends that I'm sure you're picking up on globally as well around this transformational change that's going on, as you may have seen on the news just in the last few days, really, that both Germany and Denmark, I think it is, are both looking to move away from the dominant, well-known technology companies that we all know and have lots of experience with, and they're looking for different providers that might be European-based. Or even open source technologies. And there's some interesting moves and trends taking place with that. And it was interesting what you were sharing there, Steve, as well, about almost like how things are going full circle. So we started off on-prem, and then the whole world was in like some sort of race to the cloud. And everyone sort of sat back and went, maybe it's not quite everything we thought it's going to be. And let's just compare the numbers and look at whether this is actually returning the investment we thought. And then some are now doing more of a hybrid situation, maybe, or maybe even going even further back to the on-prem. I don't know.
It's happening as well.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I mean, fascinating. We'll probably dig into that a bit later, but I'm going to let Chris ask the next question, and then I'll come back to some of the points later on. But Chris, over to you for a minute.
Yeah, thank you. I love the fact as well, Steve, that you've got people that you started out with who are still buying from you. Buy from people buy from people you trust. Yeah, that's fabulous. I love to see
Great
that.
to hear.
Yeah. We've mentioned a little bit about evolution there for AI, cloud computing, cybersecurity. Some ever-changing sort of technology, and like you say, people have moved to the cloud and back and whatnot. From sort of leaders across the sector there, what are the things that you think they should be paying attention to in terms of the sort of emerging technologies at the moment? Is everything AI driven at the moment, or, you know, what? I think with the AI side of things as well, we've even seen that in the short period of time that's been out, where everything needs to be done in AI. I think you mentioned, Jamie, that somebody said, if I get another AI email, I won't be replying to it. I'll let AI reply to it.
Yeah,
It was like,
exactly.
you know.
Yeah. We now have AI replying to AI emails. So now we've got robots just talking to each other. Just before we started this recording, Steve was very kindly sharing a little anecdote with us about how much tech is in his house and how it started to talk to each other. I have a similar case in my house, by the way, Steve, because I had a case where my Google Home Hubs, one answered a question for me, the other one heard the answer and thought it was talking to it, and then started to respond. And it's like we've got robots in our houses talking to each other now. But yeah, sorry, Chris, I interjected with your question there.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, go for it, Steve. Just emerging technologies and trends just within AI, cloud, and cybersecurity in the changing sort of market.
Yeah. Okay. Well, can we chop that into two separate? Let's chop it in. Well, can we chop it into three sections? Okay. I'm gonna start with AI. Okay. I was going to start at the other end, but I'm going to start with AI and work my way back. I firmly believe that we are still in a situation with AI where most organizations, big or small, okay, are still in listening mode. Okay. There's no real massive first mover advantage going on at this point in time, because people are still trying to figure out, what the hell does this mean? What is it actually going to do for me? And so there is still some listening to happen. And I think during probably the back end of 25, 26, we're going to start to see organizations, a more wider cross section of organizations, start to make specific decisions, demonstrable decisions about how they are going to implement AI in their businesses. But right now, they're like, what does it mean? Now, let me give you an example of that. Most people on the peripheries of this, so I apologize to anybody listening to this that are really into AI and go, God, blimey, he's dumbing this down a bit. But there's an awful lot of people, there's an awful lot of business leaders, when if you have a conversation with them about a large language model and a small language model, they have got no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. But let's just talk about what most of the industry, or what most of the hype is. It's all about, this is going to make your business the most amazing business when you use it, because it's now the only reason you're going to do that is if you actually build IP. Yeah, because if you can use AI to build IP to drive something that is yours, that you can intrinsically sell or compete in a better way in the industry, then guess what? Then that's AI working well for you. But if you share that information with a large language model, it's out there, honey. Yep. It's gone. Everybody's using it. Yeah. And so therefore, if you are actually going to try and use AI to be that have that competitive edge, you've got to think about a small language model. Oh, and by the way, those are the sort of things that I'm providing in my data centers today. I'm already kitting out some of my racks in data centers to provide GPUs in servers that are capable enough to support a small language model that your data scientists can work on. Now, you might pull in large language model data, but you're never going to give your results back to that large language model, because you're going to build with your data scientists your IP. Yeah, that's the first thing. I don't know. I'd really love to understand whether you think that was a piece of BS that I've just talked to you about, or whether you guys think that that's irrelevant.
In my wider life, Steve, because I have many different hats, and so in one of my other hats, I help businesses and startups and things, and get involved in evenings and weekends helping other business leaders grow their businesses and things. And one of them I'm working with has done just what you've described. They've taken AI, used it to create proprietary IP, and they've done it in a closed small LLM, small language model kind of approach so that none of the data could be used by anybody else or data scraped in any way to inform any learning for the model itself. And they've done exactly what you just described, actually. And now they've got a proprietary platform which can scale globally with proprietary IP that uses AI in a way that's unique to it, which is going to, I think, be quite big in the future. So I absolutely echo what you were saying there, Steve.
And and what you've either done is you've either built a product which you can commercialize, or what you've done is you've built AI into your current environment to provide you with an advantage over your competitors, whether it is you can analyze the data faster, whether or not you can visualize the dream quicker, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's not being talked about enough at this point in time.
I agree.
And so that's why I really am firmly in the camp of people are still in listening mode. Okay. I think also is that where AI is we have a danger of AI being that next cloud silver bullet. So if we're not careful, it will be a case of, don't worry, AI will do everything. Yeah. Now I've worked long enough in the IT industry that maybe you remember this, but garbage in, garbage out still exists.
Yeah,
okay?
Absolutely.
And so therefore, and I think one of the interesting thing there is I don't know if you saw, I posted something on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, but it was a Sky News reporter who does a podcast and who transcribes his podcast, and he gets AI to do that for him. Okay. And basically he found that his podcast that he was going to give had already been transcribed. So he'd obviously gone through a process with the transcription, but had been transcribed and was already up on the site as a transcribed podcast. And so he asked his AI assistant, I can't remember which one it was, where did you get the transcript from? And it came back and categorically said, well, I got it from your transcript podcast. And he went, but I haven't uploaded that yet. And they were like, no, I've got it. You definitely uploaded it. And so he said, okay. And it was 20 to 7 in the morning. And he said, at what point was this transcript uploaded? And it came back and said, at 7:50. And he went back and said, it's not 7:50 yet. Oh, sorry, I made a mistake. I uploaded it at 8:10. And it's an amazing thing, as I say. Look on my LinkedIn. But effectively, at the end of the day, he got AI to say, "Oh yes, I'm sorry, I seem to have lied to you." Yeah, I'll take it on. I'll take it on board and not do that again.
Don't you feel like AI is? If it was a person, wouldn't AI be like a mischievous teenager at this point?
Yeah, and actually, it sounds exactly like that. So in reference to that silver bullet, I think, again, we can't take our brains out and go, don't worry, it will be okay. We still have to acid test. We still have to be the final check and balance in terms of what this stuff is doing, or it's going to get it will get out of control, not dangerously out of control, but it'll get out of control, and you won't have the right understanding of how that logic has been applied to the problem that you've allowed AI to work on for you.
Well, I 100% agree. I think we're living in fascinating times, aren't we, really, in some ways, because we're seeing all these unintended, like, new kind of issues emerge as well, as all digital disruption creates. I'll give you an example from just this week. Chris and myself were in a meeting with one of our partners earlier this week, and he's recruiting at the moment, and he happened to share with me, he said, well, we got 40 applications. And he said, as I was scoring them, I recognized that 30 of them or thereabouts, the applications all had the same paragraph in. Even the same words, like furthermore, and all these sort of AI sort of stereotype things were in there, and he said they were all beautifully written and a really high standard. And then he says, I realized why. So I think authenticity. It's a bit off topic from what we're talking about, but I do believe authenticity is going to be a big thing for sure.
So the second point to answer you, Chris, is cybersecurity. Okay, so, and this links to AI as well. Okay, so again, I can't remember where the report was from, but effectively, an organization implemented AI. They basically gave AI the free rein over their data environment to crawl for things like, hey, we'd like to know customer spend, or we'd like to know customer profile in terms of what product sets they have currently in, and all this sort of stuff. The unintended consequence of that is that somebody went in and said, how much does the chief exec earn? And because they had carte blanche given AI, it came back with all the senior execs' salaries.
I've done this with Jamie, and the amount it came back with, that can't be right, Jamie. Surely it can't be right. But no, you're right. Absolutely, unintended consequences again.
But that leads from a cybersecurity perspective. We're in unprecedented times. In terms of the threats that are out there, both incidental threats from people that are being a little bit malicious, to government-led, clearly trying to disrupt, and it's not just they're trying to disrupt a power network or something like that. They want to try and disrupt as much normal business in countries to destabilize the way that operates. And it's a scary situation, and we have lots of measures that we have in place for our clients that allow us to keep our clients and ourselves safe. And so therefore, making sure that cyber is right there at the top of an agenda is really keen. And if you're going to go with AI, then obviously you have to make sure that those checks and balances are also in place for AI as well, because the unintended consequences, somebody could manipulate AI to get at that data. So in this case, one of the things that senior leaders need to do is in a lot of cases, they are still in a situation where they are trying to monetize what benefit do I get out of cybersecurity? I spend all this money and I get nothing. Exactly. Your car insurance or the AA, Guess what? You pay them a load of money and you never call them out. Or hopefully you never call them out. And I think that the problem is that there's still too many organizations go, well, that's a lot of money. And actually that landscape has also shifted now, because again, if we talk about pivot points and we talk back at, how have we seen things change, is that, if we go back 5 years, you look at all the tools, all of the cybersecurity tools, or the EDR tools and all that sort of stuff, they're all about keeping you safe. You're in a castle, we'll build a moat. They have to cross the moat to get at you. Now it's all about proaction. I don't care about, I need a moat, but actually what I want to do is I need to know exactly what's coming in at all times. And so that I can be totally reactive to everything that's going on. And so and there's still a huge amount of organizations still have not got there. I mean, look at Marks and Spencer's, look at the Co-op, for example. They spend tons of money on, let's face it, those guys are clever at IT. They're not idiots. Okay. And with all that money and all that expertise, they were still let in, because there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that they won't get in. But the question to be asked, I think, is how long were they in there? Because guess what? On the Thursday before bank holiday, those guys didn't talk. I can't remember what they're called now. Those guys didn't turn around and go, today should we do Marks and Spencer's? Let's get on now and start. They were already in. Yeah. And, you know, you look at some of, I mean, it's an area that I really love. So you look at some of the reports, particularly the stuff out of the US equivalent of the NCSA, National Cybersecurity Center. And they sometimes do almost like crash reports, incident reports. They redact the names of the customers. But, you know, there was one that was, you know, heavily ransomed. And they'd got in and clearly then moved through the network like they always do. But actually, they then left for 6 months. They didn't do anything. And they came back 6 months later and used the same passwords to get in. And then they went, guess what?
It's just
we can
unreal.
be in here as long as we like. So I think the other thing is in terms of not only about where the market's gone, but also your question, Chris, about what do people have to think about in this respect? You've got to be secure. There's still too many people who are completely lax about where the security is. You know, we talk to customers every day, or potential customers that call us that go, you know, I haven't got 2FA turned on. You know, if I go to America tomorrow to a business meeting in America tomorrow, I can tell you right now, my laptop will not work when I get to America because I have to call my help desk and authenticate with them that it's me. Okay, before actually my network will go, okay, he's on a different IP address, and I'll let him in. And even then, I might not get to all of the things that I need to do. Yeah, and that's the level of security that people have to think about.
100%.
And the last thing, Chris, is the data itself. Until people organize their data properly, then actually doing cybersecurity properly and doing AI is not possible. So today we do lots of work, as you know, in the Microsoft space. Okay, and the number one thing that we find in that space is people used to have their shared drives, used to have their thing. They might have some stuff on a OneDrive. Okay, and what they've done is they've gone, oh, this lovely thing called SharePoint. And what they've done is they've just dumped stuff into SharePoint, into folders in SharePoint. They've not thought about who needs to access it, why they need to access it, what's going to happen in the future, what are the capabilities of SharePoint, what could this thing do for me to actually be a transformational for my business. And so it's just a big pot of data. Okay, and so therefore when we go in and talk to people about cybersecurity or start to talk to them now about AI, our first point of call is, how's your data? And if it is this disorganized rabble of data, then the first thing that you need to do is a data cleansing exercise. Yeah, what's the data? How important is it? So, you know, is it finance data? Who needs to get at it? And you need to. That's not something that Vissensa can do. What I mean by that is we can help, we can provide guidance, but actually it's people I can't go in and go, oh, Jamie, I've got, right, I think you need to use this file in your system. I don't know that. I don't know what you use. So actually it needs quite an investment from the organization to understand how they need to clean their data. And that is a bit of a mountain, but you are going to get nowhere with AI until such times, because what you want that data, you want it in sensible places, in sensible repositories, in SharePoint, or wherever you put it. Yeah. And then you want to point AI at that repository and go, tell me about that data, not tell me about all this data. Tell me about that data.
100%.
And that coming back to that question about listening mode. People are still going, how the hell do I do this? And then when they start looking at it, there's a lot of organizations that are still very unprepared. Yeah. And that's something that we can help them with. Yeah. And are helping with.
Great insight, Steve. And I was listening to you there with your last point, talking about data being the third pillar that you were talking about there. And I was mindful of that. I think is it Rupert Murdoch who said that data is the oil of the 21st century?
Definitely is.
Yeah. And if you take that, you know, through its various iterations, of course, as you were just alluding to some well-known data breaches that have happened recently. My gosh.
Others are available.
Yeah, others are available indeed. Yes. And it can't be overstated, can it, really, about the criticality of cybersecurity. And sometimes it's quite hard to sell that story in the boardrooms that we operate in, because if you're a non-technical person, you may not fully appreciate the complexities and the scale of the risk as well. It's quite hard to size that risk for non-technical people. And that's one thing I think you've always done superbly well at Vissensa, is you have taken what can be very complicated things and you've made them accessible in a way that your clients can understand. So you go, right, I get what Steve's getting at here, and Steve's the man to help, and the team at Vissensa are the people to help. I think
that's a culture thing.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, from me is that, you know, I've always tried to demystify technical things down to a business level. That's just something that is in my DNA. And you know, as a leader, you instill that in your teams.
100%, and it comes through look, from the outside looking in. I think anybody who works with Vissensa would feel that in the interactions. But next questions from me before I hand back to Chris for the following one, and it kind of follows on really from what you were just talking about in terms of the diversity of the people you work with globally and around those three pillars that you were talking about. So Vissensa's got a really diverse client base, as you said in your introduction. I mean, I know that you've worked with clients all over the world and continue to do so. You're very much a global business. So with that global perspective, you know, is there any common themes you see emerging in terms of digital transformation challenges, if I can put it that way, amongst the leaders that you work with globally? Because you're crossing all these different sectors, from defense to health to tech, you name it. You're working in all these different sectors. Is there any commonality of themes you're seeing amongst, like, when it comes to digital transformation? Is it cybersecurity? Is it AI? Is it how it relates to people and training and development needs for people to use these rapidly changing technologies? Any common themes in any of that you see that you want to share?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, you know, back to how cloud is being used. I think that people are much more they're much more aware, and they're much more savvy in terms of the things that should be in the cloud and things that shouldn't be in the cloud. So across all sectors, we're seeing a real shift to make sure that workflows are identified, in the right manner, and they're being put in the right place. I mean, if we as I said in an earlier question, is that, you know, edge computing is something that is really on the ascendancy in terms of its availability. And there's more of that available in the public cloud that's usable, and there's definitely more available in a hybrid environment. It's one of our specialities, is to be able to hook those things together. So whether or not you are you know, you're in maybe 3 or 4 different geo sectors, and you basically want something like an express route, or you want a dedicated link into one of those public clouds, in that respect. I think that's definitely something. If you look at those large cloud companies, you know, they've understood this as well. So you look at Azure and you look at AWS, you know, you have local versions of that these days. It's managed. The equipment is their equipment. So you've got Outpost and for AWS and stuff like that, where effectively, if you want to have effectively a local version of AWS for you that then communicates directly with AWS in the cloud, you can get it. It's a premium. It's a premium service. But now you have the ability to have this real life servers sitting close to your customers, which then can benefit from all of that infrastructure that people like AWS have got to transit to other places and bring it home, or bring it to where it needs to be. So I think there's definitely people have gone down that route. I think also is that one of the things that I think I've seen is there's a bit of a negative here, is that because people rush to this too quickly, is they don't think enough steps ahead. So I've seen a number of examples where the intention to do something and the spend to do something has been absolutely the right choice, but they have basically blinkered themselves to what innovation might get up to And so therefore, when they have arrived at the euphoria of having something implemented, the market has moved on, or the technology's moved on, and then they're trying to retrofit something to something that actually is more difficult to retrofit, and sometimes is more difficult for the business. And of course, you also have to add to that is that, you know, every time you pivot, or every time you introduce something new, because it might be a great idea, okay, you are disrupting the business. You talked about learning there, Jamie. You know, people need to understand how to use these systems. You know, the more systems, the more complex you make them, the more convoluted to do things you make, actually the less efficient people get, and actually the less and the more dejected they get, because, you know, everybody's they've got to enjoy what they're doing. And if it becomes a robotic you know, activity to try and make things work, and there's still too much of that about, I think. And I think that's to some extent is CIOs and CTOs who are really great technical people, but haven't come from a design, or haven't had enough design expertise, that they're solving a problem, and they're solving a difficult problem, and it's absolutely the thing to do, but they're not thinking several steps ahead. You know, we take it to a completely different context. You know, one of my chairman, a guy called John Keating, you know, he did a podcast for a leaders program, a leaders podcast a little while ago. And one of the questions that was asked there, which I found fascinating, was he said, what was one of the biggest mistakes you made, John? Yeah. And basically what he said was, whenever I went for a job, then basically I'd instead of thinking about what's the job after that I want, so this job is a stepping stone to the job, I went for the job and then thought, oh God, blimey, I've now got to think about what the stepping stone is to the real job I want. That's the analogy I'm making here. So, you know, you solve a problem in IT, but actually, is that really where the organization is, or is it transitional to it? And if it is, what are all the consequences on the business as well as well as technology to make that happen?
100%.
So I think I see that as well in that respect. And then lastly, and you alluded to this right at the beginning when you talked about the European stuff and Sweden and Luxembourg, is the data custodian question. Okay. And I think that is also something that is definitely there. We get asked about it quite a lot. I think that the current situation across the world, particularly in the US, you know, the Cloud Act does give those US organizations the tenure to do stuff which is unpalatable to legislation, particularly in Europe, in the UK. I'm not making a personal statement there, by the way. But people are worried about that. You know, NHS data. There's already been leeches of NHS data given away to particularly US organizations from contracts that have been signed by the previous government saying, yes, we'd like you to consult on this. Well, that they've got access to that data. So there's no reason why that data has not, in some part, if not all, arrived at the doors of foreign organizations. Foreign owned and run organizations. And I think that where we are politically in the world at this point in time, I think that everybody is becoming a little bit more nervous about the whole supply chain. I mean, COVID caused a real supply chain problem. Okay, and that started people thinking about where things should be made or where things should be procured from. And I think that we're not immune to that. I think that we also in IT there are definitely questions that get asked about where that data custodian lies, and should we be doing what we're doing?
100%. Great insights again there, Steve. And when you were talking about the chairperson being asked that question about their biggest mistake, I was thinking, well, I know how I'd answer that from my chairperson point of view. My biggest mistake was completely missing Bitcoin. I had a friend come to me and said, I've just put $8,000 into this thing called Bitcoin. and I think it's going to go up a lot. You should get into it. Just put a few grand into it. And I looked at it, and with my traditional investor head on, I was like, I can't even calculate the net present value of this thing. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? And I had this confused old man face on. And obviously, I got this look back from a person, a younger person, looking at me like I'm talking to a dinosaur, you know. And I was still adamant. I'm absolutely right. He came back to me a couple of years later, like he'd made about 4 million from his £8,000 or something. And he had this big grin on his face going like, told you, you know. And I'm like, I stand by my comment. It's ridiculous. Anyway, Chris, next question from you.
Fantastic. Yeah, you'd be retired now. I don't know. Oh, you're thinking, hey, but you'd be missed out on these conversations, Jamie. So, you know, benefits to not investing there. Yeah. You mentioned there, Steve, about potentially your CAO or your tech leader not thinking about the steps ahead down the line, potentially. In their roles, in this new era, everything's changing and accelerating at an incredible rate. What is sort of the expectations on those leaders? What do they need to be aware of? What do they need to do? You think it's bigger now than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago? Is it more complicated?
10 years ago, 8 years ago, you know, just pre 5 years ago, how many IT managers or directors would be in a board meeting? They might have the title, but actually sitting on a board. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. With real power to turn an organization around. And you know, again, Jamie, you talked about new oil. Yeah. Data being the new oil. Okay. It has now come to pass that most boards understand that data is king. That it may be their data, but they need to analyze that. They need to do things fast. They need to be precise. It needs to be accurate. The decision making that they have is all predicated on data that has been streaming in from whatever input method that they collect that from, and that's IT that's doing that. Okay, and so therefore again the whole thing about how things are organized, how reliable it is, how secure it is, how trustworthy that data is, all of that sort of stuff falls immediately into play, and elevates the importance of having the right people in those positions who can understand the trajectory of where IT is going and how that best be used. Okay. And so, yeah, their jobs have become, instead of minding that funny thing downstairs with all the flashing lights, they have been actually the captains of destiny, and are the captains of destiny. A CEO will make decisions about where the company might go or what we might do. Okay, but it's all referenced off data. It's all referenced off things that are input to me as the chief exec. Then they're no different for huge corporations. They're doing that all the time, just in bigger volumes. The questions that they're asking are pretty much similar. Hey, we're all in business to make money. We're all in business to try and employ people. We all have to stay on the side of the law. So all of the standard dynamics of making a company work properly and the longevity of an organization, doesn't matter how big you are in doing those things. And I think the CIO, the CTO, CIO of organizations, I mean, they've now had to take on the CISO role. As we talked to them before, that whole thing I said about the three things, AI and data and that sort of stuff. Well, guess what? That stuff has all collapsed together. So, if they haven't been forced into a CISO role, or if the CISO hasn't been forced into a CIO role, then it's just those roles are very, very close together, and it is the engine room of how an organization can predict where they need to be next. So I think there's been massive. I think there's been massive.
I think just on that as well, you think about growing up in the 70s and 80s and that, you go to the shop and you'd buy something. These days you go to a supermarket. If you want to get the best prices, got to use your club card. Getting that data through, and all of a sudden you're getting an offer for cheaper cereal because you haven't bought any for the last 3 months. And it's that same data collection. I know that's a completely different industry, but that data's there, isn't it?
On that point, let me just share an anecdote that's totally maybe inappropriate, so I'm going to share it anyway. What have you
bought on Amazon recently then?
One of the best case studies, Chris, that combines your point with the point Steve was making about cybersecurity is a very famous case study. I won't quote the supermarket in case I get it wrong from memory, but a supermarket that had a loyalty scheme. The family was using the loyalty cards and they're checking out. Anyway, wife goes on a business trip for a week and then comes back and is using it in the supermarket a short time later and is surprised to see that some of the coupons are for contraceptives that come up. It led to quite a well-known test case to do with the fact that we need to be very careful about how data is used, because while she was away on a business trip, her husband at the time had used the card to buy certain things, and it led to a very, very complicated situation arising. And it was used as a case study of the critical importance of how data is used, not just sensitivity from a cybersecurity point of view, but also how you're actually using that data and the unintended consequences of data should you mess it up or not. Do what Steve was referring to, with thinking through the long-term optics of where's this going and what might the unintended consequences be of this technology. So yeah, data is absolutely just everything and needs to be used with such sensitivity and careful planning. And also it can be a hugely powerful thing, of course, for powering ahead your business. I mean, for example, I remember I once had the privilege a long time ago to be at an event that the as was then chief executive of Tesco was speaking at, Sir Terry Leahy. And he is sort of, to a certain extent, credited with the amazing success of getting Tesco to where it was, a few years ago.
Yeah.
And that was down.
He definitely was there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and definitely. And it was the loyalty card scheme had been a key element of that strategy, and how incredibly effective it was at getting them to where they were. And again, data. That was all just data driven and using predictive analytics and lots of other things. It's fascinating stuff. And you sort of touched upon what I was going to dig into next, really, a little bit there, Steve, in terms of advice for senior leaders who are maybe a bit uncertain about how to leverage any of these technologies. Because I don't know if you've encountered this, but what I see everywhere I go is I'll often be in networks where there's lots of very powerful people in very senior positions. And if they're talking in a public forum, they'll tend to showboat a little bit about their organizations, because there's always quite a lot of egos knocking around. And it'll be like, oh, yes, we're doing this with AI, or we're doing that. You have a very, very different conversation when you're privately having a trusted conversation over coffee, where they look at you and say, I need your help with this, actually, because I haven't got a clue what we're supposed to be doing with this. So there's a bit of a gap between public perception sometimes, where egos are involved, and the reality. And so in that context, in the trusted conversations, what would you give by way of advice, Steve, for someone who's not even sure how best to leverage cloud and AI and all these technologies we're talking about at the moment? Sort of where would you guide them as a starting point? Like if somebody approached Vissensa, for example, and said, look, I'm a chief exec of a big company. I know I should be doing better with all this stuff. Where do we start? Is there any sort of things, I know it's a very broad, complex question, so, to answer it properly would take longer than we've got, but in a nutshell, as a summary, sort of where would you recommend they go to for help, or how would they start that process? You know what I mean?
Well, anyway, first of all, I have to say, call Vissensa. I'd have to go there.
I would endorse that, yeah.
but no, seriously, is that if you've, I think this is a bigger, wider question that you've just asked. Okay, I think this is a big differentiator between an awful lot of companies out there that provide IT services. Okay, so it's really easy to sit in a meeting, listen to some problems that a chief exec or a CIO or whoever it might be is talking about. Maybe a group of those you've been invited into a board or into a senior leadership team meeting. And they're talking about those, and basically you leave the room saying, well, you need 1 of them, 4 of them, 7 of those, and you need to plug them up like this. Okay. And there's too much of that going on, because everybody wants the greenback. They all want to make money. And that sort of thing. Actually, again, this from, let's go back to our first meeting. Yeah. You had a problem. And if you remember rightly, what I said is I'll come in with some people and I'll tell you whether I can fix that problem,
Mm.
and I might not be able to fix it.
Mm.
I did, didn't I? Do you remember that?
Absolutely,
100%.
Yeah.
And it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you some money for me to get to that point. But what you will have is you'll have a definitive answer in whether or not what I think the problem is, and then I'll tell you whether I can fix it. And if I can't fix it, you might find somebody else who can fix it.
Yeah.
And again, that is so far in my DNA. This is exactly how Vissensa run. It's one of the most proudest things I can say about Vissensa is the ethical nature and the partnership that we immediately engage with organizations. So we'll tell it as it is. Yeah. We won't sugarcoat it. Okay. But you won't get any flannel. So in answer to your question is, you've got to sit those people down and you've got to say, where are you going? It's that question, as I said, about, what job, where are you going? Not what's in front of you now. What are you trying to achieve? Because if you tell me what you're trying to achieve, the first thing I can see is what you've got in front of you is not going to get you there. And I can now start talking about the steps. So this is something that we do. And it's fresh in my memory because we have these conversations with people every day, every single day, Jamie. All right. Which is they want to get somewhere. And this is their current position. And sometimes it's bad news. Sometimes it's actually you're going to have to step back one to go forward four. Yeah. But you lay that out in front of them and you can cost that for them, and we can do a whole lot of planning around there. And then you can start making that journey. And I bring you back to the data cleansing exercise. It's a really difficult exercise because you say to them, you're nowhere with your data, and you're going to have to invest some time figuring out where you think the buckets are. And there's going to be a whole bunch of things which is just rubbish. I'm not going to say delete it, but have this bucket called rubbish and chuck that stuff in there that I don't know whether it's useful or not right now. We'll chuck it in that rubbish bucket. But these other buckets, I know that's useful. I know this is, and you put them in those buckets. And then when they go, crikey, that was a difficult exercise. You now go, okay, now I want you to classify in those buckets the data that's really sensitive, that are not so sensitive, that you would give to anybody that came into the organization, and they go, oh, okay, wow, and they say, well, why do I need to do that? It's because, well, actually, what we're going to do is watermark that stuff so that actually that financial data that you've got is, if somebody comes along in SharePoint or in Google or anything, and they go, I'm just going to attach this file, it goes, sorry, this is not leaving the building. Oh, and by the way, that version, every time you send stuff out to people and you go, oh, was that version 2 you sent me, Bill, or is it version 3? Well, actually, if you set this up right, they come to your environment and get the latest version. So you never have to have this, oh, sorry, I was using version 2 where you were using version 3. This is what technology is for. But loads of people don't understand that. And then once you've got them through that journey, you turn around and go, now you need to create a matrix of people who has access to this stuff. Now, okay, we just talked about that in 3 minutes. I've got to tell you, I've got a couple of charities that we've been working with for over 9 months on this data cleansing exercise. Okay, purely because a real mess. A real mess in terms of where they were, but actually with some real custodian problems. Data that is very, very high tariff data, stuff that they really, really need to keep secure. And when you look the CEO in the eye the first time and said, can you tell me that somebody can't get at that data? The answer to that question is, I don't know. And that's the wrong answer. So, Chris, in answer to your question there is you've got to have honest broker questions, answers for their questions, which is sensible for what they're trying to do. So that might be, you might be gauging your response based on the size of the organization, because they haven't got a gazillion pounds to spend. But that doesn't mean to say that they can't do it. It doesn't mean to say that the way they do it is only almost as good as the big organization. I always, the way I describe this is that we work for massive organizations. The largest organization we work for is a £15 billion market cap organization, finance organization,
Wow.
and I will provide the same advice and guidance to that organization that I will supply to a 3-man organization down the road, because it needs to be the same.
Yeah,
it needs to be the same. It might not be the billion-pound switches and stuff like that, but it will have exactly the same topography to it to allow them to get the benefit out of that sort of stuff. So I think that's the thing, and it's whether or not the organisation is at a mature enough point to go, yeah, okay, we get that, and it is a journey, and it will take us some time. We're not asking you to plump all the money all up front. You just need to understand as a board that over the next 18 months, here's the sort of spend that you're going to have to spend to get there. But let's face it, that's only prudent financial planning for any organization anyway.
I agree. I think, and a lot of it is getting people to understand how those financial risks are sized as well, because often people will sometimes look at investment in cybersecurity and ask questions like, can we afford it? But really it's more, well, can you afford not to, given what could happen? You've got to size that correctly. I mean, somebody who, a well-known leader I was talking to just yesterday, he was talking to me about some of the headlines recently about data breaches and what it's costing certain organizations. There was one in the news just yesterday that was, I can't remember, it was 2.3 million or something. Somebody had been fined by the Information Commissioner's Office, which had bankrupted the company. So they'd just said, well, we've got to pay that, we're bust. So a data breach can, in many cases, literally take down a company.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so major, but I'll let Chris.
And we've seen that. I mean, the really tragic thing about this is that over the last 2 years, we've probably helped 8 organisations who've come to us saying, we've had a data breach. Can you help us? Okay, who've then become clients of ours. Yeah, okay, and the ones that we can help are the ones that have at least invested in the situation that it might happen, because with disaster recovery, this is another thing that I talk to my teams and talk to leaders about, is that, if we go back 10 years, and you talk right back to that first question of what's changed, you go back 10, 15 years, disaster recovery meant the 747 crashing on your building and obliterating everything, including the machines and your people and all your assets. That's what disaster recovery meant. Yeah. Today, disaster recovery is ransomware. Yeah, it's cybersecurity. It's got 747 is unlikely. Unfortunately, we've had a tragic accident in India, and our heart go out for those people. But at the end of the day, it's about and the chances of a ransomware attack are much greater than a plane crashing on your building. Okay,
huge.
But as you're right, it's business leaders doing enough. Oh, I've got a firewall. I've got a firewall, and I've got some backups. Yeah. When was the last time you tested? When was the last time you black tested whether or not you could make this work? Yeah. And very few of them have. And then when it happens, they get it all out, and it goes, oh, it doesn't restore. The most tragic example I can give you is a customer came to us and said, we've had a ransomware attack. We've got backups. We back up every hour on the hour. Tons of, we spent lots and lots of money with a well-known backup organization that just does backup. It's not their fault that okay. Nobody ever checked it. So they've been backing up religiously for 12 years. Okay. and they're corrupt. Backups are corrupt, every damn one of them. Well, they efforted, because they hadn't they'd never done a black test. They'd never pulled anything out and tried to do that. So, that's another thing that we advised about doing is, yes, it's a pain in the ass. Yes, it's not going to make you any money. Yeah. But you need to do it, because actually, rightly what you said, Jamie, is the consequences is if I went downstairs and turned all of your servers and all of your systems off now, how long would it take for it to massively affect your business?
Okay? Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to have a friend who was the head of security for a well-known high street bank, and he got paid an awful lot of money for heading up the team that he headed up. And I used to say to him, like, so how, what's a typical day for you like? And he'd say, nothing. Nothing. He says, I get to the end of the day, and on some days I've sent a few emails. I've done pretty much nothing. And I said, you're getting paid 6 figures for doing nothing. He says, that's not what I get paid for. When it goes wrong and we have a breach, every second that the bank systems are affected, and he gave me a pound sign, and I forget the exact figure, but it was astronomical. Yeah, it was like millions every 10 seconds, right?
and let's face it, it's the bank. You're right in the banks, but again, Chris, you were talking about, you're talking about other organisations that we now use. They are as well. I mean, you look at Amazon, Netflix, Tesco. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if you turn that stuff off, that little counter starts ticking really fast.
Astronomical. So like my friend in the bank, he said to me that in his salary negotiations, it was based on how many seconds it takes him to restore systems in the event of a failure, was how they weighted the risk of like what they should be paying that guy, kind of thing. I think it is a fascinating area, that, isn't it? It's
well, and it is, and I think also is that the other thing there is the point. I think that this lens on not only the vulnerabilities that we've been talking about, but also about what leaders should to really think about is that plan has to be foolproof. And so therefore, not back of a fab packet, but it really has to go down into detail. And the other thing that I find that my team finds when we're doing this, God, I don't do this anymore, by the way, guys. It might, in this podcast thing that I get out there and do stuff, is that they keep me as far away from technology as they possibly can these days. Okay. But the thing is that the cost of building a sensible plan is also really massive, because you have to take all the risks into. So, so you have lost all your servers. Okay, you've been running your servers for 5-8 years. You've got fantastic backups. So you're going to buy new servers, okay, which is going to, well, if you haven't bought new servers already, so you've got some downtime already, because you can't go to Dell or HP and say, could I have some servers? Because they'll go, yeah, we can get those to you in Thursday next week. Yeah. Then you've actually got to build them. But actually, does your application still run on them? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, because the whole thing's moved on, and it's like, well, that application doesn't work, and we've seen some of that, but we've seen some of that as well. All of that stuff has to be lensed. It's the minute detail. It is always the devil in the detail, isn't it, guys?
I agree.
So if you look at it face on and go, yeah, we can do backup for you. Don't worry about it. We'll get that tool to do it, and we can do it every night for you. No. That's a smidgen of the story. Yeah. You need to have, what is it you are trying to do? How are you trying to do it?
100%. Yeah, I agree.
So it's a learning exercise for people, as well as being able to make sure that you've got technology in place that will do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree completely. I'm mindful of time, so what I'm going to do, because you've been incredibly generous with your time, Steve. So
that's all right.
We're gonna ask 2 more questions. I'll do the penultimate one, and I'm going to give Chris the honor of asking the very final question on our list, which relates more to sort of final bit of advice and guidance. But I'm going to flip it a little bit now as my final question anyway, before Chris does the last one. I'm going to flip it away from, we talked a lot about technology there, and we got into the weeds of some of that. I think it was really, really interesting what you were talking about the seriousness of some aspects of this, because an old business professor of mine always used to drill into me a question. He said, when you're in a leadership position in the future, always ask yourself the question of what would it take to kill you as a business. And one thing pretty high on the list, I think, from this conversation is, well, a critical cybersecurity failure is quite likely to be one of the key things that is going to kill your business, as the example from just yesterday shows, where the scale of the fine has actually bankrupted the company involved. So, I mean, I think that's one key takeaway. But if we flip it from the tech for a second and think about people more, and from a leadership point of view, we've talked a bit about AI and the trends taking place with cloud and on-premise and hybrid tech infrastructures and all that sort of stuff. But what do you believe are going to be the really essential human leadership qualities that will remain so vital, no matter how advanced technology becomes? And you sort of alluded this to on a few occasions during this conversation, Steve, because you've alluded a few times to the culture of Vissensa And also that comes from you, in my opinion, because you're the person at the top of the tree, because you're the chief executive, you are the boss. And so that is a critical role in defining culture, obviously, because all of your team will be affected by how you shape that culture, either consciously or unconsciously through your behaviors. But despite however whizzy tech gets, what do you think the human leaders at the top of those organizations, what are their characteristics going to need to be in this rapidly uncertain and unpredictable world, in your opinion? Because you've done an amazing job of navigating a lot of transformation.
Yeah. Well, I think the most important, I think, is that is investment. I mean, probably the biggest thing is humility. Yeah. I think that's, I think you're right. If you look at most management programs, you look at most people that talk about hierarchy of management. Okay, the style of a leader and what you do, that walking the talk, okay, is the thing that defines what your team underneath do and the way they behave. And I absolutely agree and associate with definitely with that comment. I think that, people today, we've had the luxury of having jobs where we had quite a bit of longevity in your job. Your job with in the education sector, Jamie, and then your work you've been doing with C Learning. There's some longevity. I mean, we haven't had to go and not that we could be employed. I don't think I could get employed anymore.
I'm pretty sure I'm unemployable.
16 years at Vissensa. That's getting there. It's not quite gold watch, but it's it's getting there. The landscape for younger people is a lot different. And so I think that you have to approach that with humility. I think you have to look at how can we teach these people the sort of things that we learned in a stable environment, in a technological environment that was emerging. It's emerging as crazily today, yesterday, and when we were younger, than it was. Look, when I started as that trainee computer operator, okay, it was for a retail organization, okay, and it was the size of a Tesco's Metro, the floor plan, and it is 256K with flashing lights on the end of it like Star Trek. Yeah. And now I've got more in this. Yeah. Okay. And I'm still alive. Yeah. I mean, so let's not get hung up on, man, it's really moving fast now and it wasn't moving fast then. God has it moved fast. Okay. I think that the level of input, the level of things that are moving fast has got quicker. And we need to help. We need to help people, because unless we can get these people to do some of the things that we've talked about on this podcast, in terms of the way to perform, the way to approach problems and things like that, then they won't do that the way that we do this today. Okay. And, COVID didn't help, and working from home doesn't help. I'll go out there right now. I'm not an advocate of working from home. People still come into my office, not every day. Okay, but I think that teamwork, camaraderie, I think the ability to learn. One of my biggest heroes is Gene Kranz, mission director of the Apollo mission, age I think 28, 29, running a team. Okay, and one of the things he says in some of the interviews he does, he said that he would walk into mission control, he'd walk into that control room, and you could smell the room. Yeah, you'd know whether or not like something's up just by walking in there and smelling the room. Yeah, which I think is an interesting comment. And if I look at my technical people, my first lines and my second lines and my consultants, I like those people to be getting together, because if a problem happens with a customer and it's serious enough, the tempo in that technical room in Vissensa changes in a heartbeat. And I want my junior people to see that reaction from the senior people, to go, whoa, hello, we're all having a nice, something's happened, and they go into a different mode. And that's a learnt experience. And I think that's really important. It's probably one of the most fundamental things that we can do in terms of from an IT perspective in that respect. But also I think also be analytical yourself. So in other words, back to the AI thing, don't trust on a bunch of things that were heard. At least critically appraise those things.
Yeah.
And see whether or not they all stack up in the same way. Because you probably find something that's not quite in that, and that you can probably deduce something from it that is going to be useful. So I think it's all about people. I really do. Technology 100%. Will just happen.
Yeah.
I think people and being able to use it properly, I think, is the absolute pinnacle of what we need to do.
Awesome.
Fabulous. Yeah. Great answer, Steve. I love the that ownership as well. You know, something that needs to happen there and then. Your people jump on it. There's an increase in tempo because they know the importance of that. That's a great culture to have within your organisation, which is why, you know, going back to an earlier comment, you've still got some of those original clients staying with you. They're not going to move because they know they can rely on you. And Jamie always gives me the last question, because then everybody goes, oh God, he's asked that question. So the final question, and this is one of those, Steve, we will be checking in a couple of years to see how accurate your answer was. Here we go. One piece, just one thing, one key insight or piece of advice you would give to current or future leaders looking to navigate the complexities of today's tech landscape. What would that be? What would be your one tip?
It's quite a big question, that one, Chris.
It's why he makes me ask it, and then everybody goes, "Don't get Chris back on these podcasts." You know?
If there was one piece of advice that I would give is foresight. Okay, the way I describe it to my teams in terms of whether or not you're trying to solve a problem or you're in a meeting and or whatever it might be. Again, this comes off, I can't remember what management style this may have been. It might have been something like Ken Blanchard or something like that. I'm going, you know, I'm an old fart here, so I'm going back a long time. And he talks about helicoptering to the ceiling. Okay, so you know when you're deep in that thing and you've been asked to make a decision or there's a decision to be made. Before you make that decision, helicopter to the top of the ceiling and just look at the landscape and look at what are the options, who's in the room, where's that? Because I think the decision you then make is actually a lot more of a defined and considered decision in that respect. And I think just one other thing I want to add to that as well, because I think it's also a point in, because it just reminded me from the Ken Blanchard thing, is that look, you guys have, you know, you do lots of podcasts, you talk to lots of people, you talk to lots of leaders like I do, you go on all sorts of things. You know, sometimes when you go home, you know, we cut and bleed and we're humans just like everybody else, and you know, you sometimes go, what's the point of what we do? What's the point of this? Why should I spend 2 hours talking to you guys and hope that somebody listens to it and goes, oh, that was an interesting bit of information? And it comes off a thing from a book. It's Ken Blanchard. I was listening to this on a tape. Okay, there you go. That's how long it was.
That's got retro chic now. That's cool.
Sticking it in the car on the way home. But basically, he recounts a story which is basically about a friend of his that had died. And he was recounting the story that the friend had told him, and he was saying he was on a beach. This is very American. Okay, so sick bags out if you really hate it. Okay, and think, oh God, this is a story that's been manufactured, but it's really poignant, I think. I mean, basically, this guy's on a beach and he's walking along a beach, and there's a kid by the water's edge, and he's standing on the water's edge and he's throwing things into the water. He doesn't know what it is, and he walks towards the kid, and he actually can see that the kid's picking up starfish that have washed up on the shore, and he's throwing the starfish back into the water. And he walks up to the kid and he says to the kid, "Kid, what are you doing?" And he says, I'm throwing these starfish back in the water. And he says, "Why?" And he says, "Well, but if I don't, they'll die." And the guy turned around and said, "But son, how can you make a difference? And the kid bent down, picked up a starfish, and he threw it into the water, and he said, I better made a difference to that one.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's important. It's important as a
Oh.
leader. You can do that with people. You can do that with customers. You can do it with millions of people on podcasts. Yeah. At the end of the day, if somebody's taken something that's useful from what we've been talking about today, our job, gentlemen, is done.
Yeah. I agree.
That's why I get up in the morning.
100%. And what a way to end it, Steve. That's just awesome. And you've left me almost a bit speechless there, which is not a position I'm often in. But that is a wonderful way to end it, and what an inspirational way to end it, and typical of you, I might say. As someone who's known you a long time, I know you're one of the most authentic leaders you could ever find. That's in the DNA of Vissensa. Hopefully through this conversation, anybody listening to it later on, or maybe reading the article that's going to be produced from it, will get a really good sense of who Vissensa are, what you're about.
I'm on LinkedIn.
And link to Steve on LinkedIn by all means. Steve regularly shares fascinating things. Also, just on a personal basis, Steve, you know the respect I've got for you, but you're also genuinely one of the really good people walking around on this planet, trying to make it a bit better than how you found it. You do good things for good people for all the right reasons, not for any personal recognition or anything. And I think that's an absolute
Thank you, Jamie.
Absolute credit to you.
I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, you should be. And final, in terms of, you should be really proud of the work you do. It's just brilliant, which is why we're having this conversation. So you've been incredibly generous, as always, with your time. We've covered some fantastic topics there.
It's been a ball. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, I look forward to our team writing up the article from it and sharing that with the world in due course. But we'll before we wind up the recording for now, just a final thank you from Chris, myself, and everyone at the Sea Learning team. Big respect to Vissensa, big respect to you, Steve. Thanks a million for the conversation, and look forward to the next one.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.